IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It's Wednesday, August 14th. We are 17 days away from Notre Dame kicking off the 2024 season. I know y'all are excited. I'm certainly excited. Can't wait to get this season started and just find out how good this team is. You know, there's still so much to talk about. Plenty of things happening, all types of news. There just it never stops. The news never stops, but it's all just talk until we can find out what this team is. But I do think that there's a lot of things that as we look at this team, there's a lot of things to be excited about. There's still some question marks and concerns. And so what I want to do today in advance of tomorrow's practice viewing, which will be our last practice viewing, is really just dive into several topics in regard to just this Notre Dame football team. And just so a scheduling note, we will not be doing a buy-sell hold today. I've been dealing with our dog Rita's very sick. Angela's at the emergency room with her now. Just haven't been able to take the time to make the cards and do all that kind of stuff for the buy-sell hold. But I'm going to reschedule it either for tomorrow or potentially like after the practice viewing is kind of my plan right now is to, I'm going to have actually one of our new writers is going to be with me tomorrow. Trevor Trowbridge is going to be on the show with me tomorrow. So we're going to talk about the practice, and then I'm what most likely we'll have the buy-sell hold after that. So that's what we'll do. So apologize for not getting that today, but I still have some very good stuff to talk with you guys about today, and I'm very excited about today's topics. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame and the coaches poll or the AP poll. We are going to talk about the Sporting News All-Americans came out, and so we're going to kind of talk about how they view Notre Dame, what it means for Notre Dame, and just give some context about the Notre Dame schedule. And then, of course, we'll dive into our two main topics today, and they kind of go hand in hand, but basically it's this. What are the five sort of areas, the sort of specific areas you say it is, like yesterday, we had some fun yesterday making our predictions for the new championship game and the college football playoff. And as I said, I had some fun yesterday, right? Like, I told y'all, look, my homer side's coming out. I just can't pick Notre Dame to lose to anybody. It was meant to be fun, not like, okay, this is my very thorough. This is if I was writing a preseason magazine, this is how it'd be. I had some fun with it. But it's also fun built around my belief in this football team and its potential. Again, that's a word that has, it's a double-edged sword type of word because potential can mean there's a lot of good things to be excited about. But normally when you're talking about potential, you're talking about things that are not established or proven yet. And that's not always a good thing. And so right now, this team is a lot about potential. But, what are five areas that I look back and say, Bryan, why are you so confident about this team? I've had people ask me, when's the last time you were this confident about a team? Well, probably 2018, maybe. You could talk about 2015 in certain areas, but other areas not so much. I didn't see 2012 coming at all. So, what makes you so confident about this team? Well, I'm going to give you the top five reasons, and some of them are going to be a little bit more broad to incorporate several different aspects. But, just looking at it and saying these are the five reasons that I am legitimately excited about this team, and not your normal every year you're always excited. I mean, I can't tell you the last time I didn't go into a season excited to find out what Notre Dame can be and think that they could be a pretty good team. And if this, and this happens, maybe they can make a deep run. This team is a little different. It's just like I have a lot more confidence. But there's also some potential stumbling blocks, and that'll be part two of the show today. Are five aspects that could potentially be stumbling blocks before Notre Dame when it comes to reaching their full potential as a program this season. What could prevent them from turning that potential into production and results? That is what I'm going to talk about today. As always, no mailbag at the end of today's show. I will answer any super chats that come along the way. So if you have something you want to say or something you want me to address, go ahead and throw a super chat in there and we'll get rocking and rolling. And also as a reminder, tomorrow we'll do the buy, sell, and hold. So there is a thread on the board about the buy, sell, hold. I'm actually going to go in there now and bump that up just to make sure it doesn't get pushed off the front page. And I'll remind everybody that we're going to do this tomorrow. And we'll get everybody squared away with the show tomorrow. So it'll be a lot of fun. So we are not going to miss out on the buy, sell, hold. We're going to do all that tomorrow. So, part one of today's show is just some news, right? Obviously, Notre Dame this week, the AP poll came out. The coaches poll came out last week. Notre Dame was ranked seventh in the coaches poll, and the AP poll came out yesterday, and Notre Dame was ranked seventh in the AP poll. This marked, I believe, the fifth time out of the last 6 years that Notre Dame has started the season in the top 10. They started and I'm going to go through this a little bit. Last year, they started 13th, but the previous year they were fifth. So I'm going to kind of go over just kind of Notre Dame in the AP poll and just kind of get into some different aspects of just it's just kind of informative. It doesn't necessarily have any broad kind of topics of conversation, but I did find it interesting. There was a tweet from Brett McMurphy that I saw the other day that I found fascinating, and I don't often say that about that, but when you look at Brett McMurphy, and he had a comment, and it's something along the lines of how many years in a row that the national champion has been a team that ranked in the top 7 to start the season. So I'm actually going to pull that up here real quick and see what he said. So let me find his tweet real fast. So he said, since 2004, every national champion ranked among the AP's top 7 with 2 exceptions. Florida State was ranked 11th in 2013. In 2010, Auburn ranked 22nd. So all the way back to 2004, a span of over 20 seasons, only 2 national champions began the year outside of the top 7 in the preseason AP poll. So, again, trends, it doesn't mean anything, but it's a trend to look at. When you look at Notre Dame in the AP poll in recent seasons, last year, as I mentioned, Notre Dame began the season ranked 13th. They finished 14th, obviously climbed as high as number 9, were as low as number 22. They were number 16 going into the bowl game, beat number 19 Oregon State in the Sun Bowl, which jumped the Irish up to 14. I don't normally complain about postseason rankings because it doesn't really matter if you're number 1, but I did not understand last year's rankings, to be honest with you. I didn't understand why Notre Dame was ranked as low as they were. I definitely didn't understand. I mean, I kind of understood why they were behind Penn State, although I don't agree with it. Notre Dame and Penn State had a common opponent, and Notre Dame was far more competitive against that common opponent than Penn State was. They both had the same record, but the team that really, I thought, made no sense to be ahead of Notre Dame is that Arizona ranked 11th. And Arizona finished the year 10-3, just like Notre Dame, but they had 3 common opponents. And Arizona beat Stanford on the road 21-20. Notre Dame beat Stanford on the road 56-23. Arizona lost to USC at USC in triple overtime. Notre Dame beat USC at home 48-20. And then Arizona beat Oregon State at home 27-24. Notre Dame beat Oregon State 40-8. I don't put as much stock in that one because that was not the same Oregon State team that Arizona played in the regular season. That's fair. That's fine. But they still stomped that team, and Notre Dame was missing a lot of guys from that game as well. So I didn't understand why Arizona's ranked ahead of Notre Dame. I thought Notre Dame should have been 12th, but at the end of the day, who cares? If you're 14th or 12th, you're not number 1, and you're not in the top 5, and that's really kind of what matters. 2022, Notre Dame began the season ranked 5th and dropped all the way out of the top 25 after the first 2 games. And that was after loss to Ohio State and Marshall. Didn't get back in until November when they beat Clemson, and then, of course, climbed up to number 15, won their bowl game over number 19 South Carolina. Notre Dame was, I believe, 21st going into the bowl season, and beat South Carolina, who was ranked 19th, which jumped the Irish up to 18. In 2021, Notre Dame began the preseason ranked 9th and finished the season ranked 8th. In 2020, Notre Dame began the season ranked 10th and ended the season ranked 5th. So back-to-back years where Notre Dame actually ranked higher than they began, for those who say that Notre Dame is constantly overrated. 2019, they began the year 9th, ended 12th. 2018, they began 12th, finished 5th. 2017, they were not ranked at all, finished 11th. 2016 was the complete opposite. They began the season 10th, finished unranked. 2015, they began at 11th, ended at 11th. Again, I felt that was too low, but at the end it doesn't matter. 2014, they began 17th and finished unranked. 2013, they began 14th and ended 20th. 2012, they began unranked, finished the season's 4th. 2011, they began 16th, finished unranked. And in 2020, they began unranked and were never ranked at any point in time in the season. So that is Notre Dame's recent history with the AP poll. I don't really care to get into the debate over, Notre Dame's always overrated. That's an emotional fan reaction, and it really doesn't require much of a response because, as I pointed out, that's just not true. And it's just not really something I really feel like discussing today or diving into today. So that is Notre Dame in the coaches poll. They do begin 7th. It doesn't have a huge impact on the postseason and the college football playoff as much as it used to, obviously. But I do think perception matters. I do think perception of what a team is does impact the college football playoff rankings to a degree, even though they don't look at it and say, hey, AP has them here, we should rank them there. I do think there's a perception of where teams are ranked, not just Notre Dame, but also their opponents that factors into it. And when you look at the AP poll, Notre Dame begins the season against number 20 Texas A&M. So a road game against a ranked opponent is how you start your season. The number 10 team in the country, according to both polls, is Florida State. Florida State comes to Notre Dame on November 9th. If Florida State only has one loss by then, they're most likely still a top 10 caliber team. Although if you look at Florida State's schedule, there's at least a decent chance that they're going to be undefeated when they come into Notre Dame Stadium on November 9th this season. You look at their schedule, there's certainly some challenging games that Florida State has to contend with in order to get to that point. They kick the season off with a game in Ireland against Georgia Tech. I think Florida State wins that game, but it's not going to be a cakewalk. They play BC in week 2, then they get a bye, then they play a really good Memphis team in week 3. I have Memphis in the college football playoff as the group of 5 representative. They play Cal, who's got some I think it's going to be a little bit feistier than people think, at SMU. It's a really good football team, and then home against Clemson. So the start to their season, there are not a lot of cakewalks on the schedule for Florida State, but I think they win them all. They get most of them at home. The only true road game they have is against SMU. Then they have a bye. Then they play at Duke. Should be a win. This Duke team's not as good as last year's Duke team. This is the big game right here that could determine whether or not Florida State is a top 10 team when they come to Notre Dame Stadium. I think this is important for Notre Dame. If Notre Dame has a loss, a game like this is going to be huge. They need Florida State to be a top 10 team if Notre Dame has a loss. If Notre Dame goes undefeated, it doesn't matter. They're going to be the 5 seed. I mean, there's no possible way that there's another group of 5 undefeated team. I don't think there's a scenario. I mean, there's always the outside chance that 3 teams from a conference finish undefeated and one of them doesn't get into the playoff, maybe. I mean, into the conference title game, maybe. That's highly unlikely. It's a little more likely now with the bigger leagues because there's more chances that certain teams don't play each other as there used to be. Like, back in the day when the Big Ten was only 10 teams, it was not possible for 2 teams to go undefeated in the Big Ten. It just wasn't possible because everybody played each other. A little bit more possible now, highly unlikely. So the odds are if Notre Dame's undefeated, it doesn't matter what Florida State could be 0-8 coming into that game, and it wouldn't matter. Notre Dame will be a 5 seed. But if there is a loss on Notre Dame's docket, or let's say the schedule hasn't been as good as I think it's going to be, and they kind of need that boost, or maybe there's not as much chaos as I think that there is, and they kind of need that boost, it's huge for Notre Dame if Florida State's a top 10 team when they come into Notre Dame Stadium on November 9th. Obviously, they got to avoid getting upset in those first 5 games. They've got to make sure they beat Clemson at home. That's not going to be easy. And then you've got Miami on October 26th at Miami. It's going to be a huge game. Huge game. This is going to be a talented Miami team, a Miami team that's going to have their own battle the week before. They play at Louisville the week before. They also play at Cal. They also play Virginia Tech at home. They play at Florida. So we're going to know a lot about those 2 football teams when they play. And then, of course, Florida State the next week plays North Carolina at home. That should be a win. And then, of course, they come to Notre Dame Stadium. So Florida State was ranked 10th, and then USC, who Notre Dame ends the season with, is ranked 23rd in both polls. So that is where you are with that. So I'm going to respond to something Archer said. He said, BD, if two teams from the same conference went undefeated in the regular season, I could see the loser of that game getting the 5 seed above Notre Dame if they were ranked higher than Notre Dame going to the championship game. No, they're not going to have a 12-0 Notre Dame team ranked lower than a team that lost a conference title game. It's just, there's no way that happens, in my opinion. No way. But to your point, this is also why it is important that a team like Florida State be really good, Archer. So, like, let's just say, that scenario is there, and I don't know how that happens because of who plays who this season. In the ACC, it's not really possible, in my opinion, for two teams to be undefeated unless it's a non-Miami, Florida State, or Clemson, because they play each other. In the SEC, I don't know that anybody, like the way that it circles, it have to be a team that we're not expecting to be there. It can't be Oregon and Ohio State. It can't be Ohio State and Michigan. Maybe it's Oregon and Michigan. It can't be one of those two teams and Penn State because they all play each other. So the odds of it happening are very, very, very slim. But even still, if one of those two teams loses, I don't see a team that's got a loss, and most of those teams will have an FCS win. They're not going to be ranked ahead of Notre Dame, who's undefeated. It's just not going to happen, in my opinion. But to your point, is we could debate that all day. It's what ifs. We don't know. What I think we can agree on, however, is what I said is if Florida State is a top 10 team when they come to Notre Dame on November 9th, and if USC is still ranked when they play the end of the season, Notre Dame needs those two teams on their schedule to stay ranked all year, or at least be ranked when they play Notre Dame. That is going to be huge for that. Because if Notre Dame has 2 wins over ranked opponents, especially if Florida State's a top 10 team, that's going to really bolster their resume, because the committee is made up of human beings, and human beings are going to have a natural recency bias. I think the committee does a great job of trying to avoid that as much as they can. Unlike the polls, which are very reactionary, there's still a recency bias to it. And I think that's something that factors into it, to why it is really important that those two teams be ranked. So you and I could go back and forth about whether they would or wouldn't. Neither of us know. You can make your case, I can make mine, but we can definitely come down the same side of saying if these two teams are ranked, that gives Notre Dame their absolute best shot of really locking down that number 5, no matter what else anybody else does. And I think that's kind of why it's important that those two teams are perceived as really good teams early in the season. Because if you're perceived as a good team and you stumble, you stub your toe a little bit early in the season, it doesn't take you as much work to get back into the top 25 as it does if, let's say, you're not perceived very highly and you then come into the season and you win some games and you're just not getting a lot of love and not getting a lot of attention. If a team that was, take Duke, for example, that Notre Dame beat last year. I think Duke was ranked 17th when Notre Dame played. If you're talking about a team that was already ranked 15th and did what Duke did the first 4 weeks, beat Northwestern, beat Clemson by 3 touchdowns, they probably are climbing into the top 10 by the time that those two teams play. And for USC fans, can I remember this? The 2016 team from USC began that season. USC was ranked 20th coming into the season, got blasted by Alabama, beat Utah State, then got blasted by Stanford, and then beat Utah. That team climbed all the way up to 9th in the polls. They only beat 2 ranked teams along the way to get there. But there was a perception that this was supposed to be a pretty good USC team, and I think that helped them climb back in. I think USC's ranking was where it should have been, but I think can be harder to climb there when you're not perceived to be good. And I think that's why those things really help Notre Dame, that these teams are ranked and that they stay ranked as the season goes on. Other bit of news from today that I thought was very fascinating is Sporting News came out with their preseason All-American team. My guy, Bill Bender, wrote the article. Bill's a great guy. If you guys have not watch the CFB Nation channel. They do a show over there. They recorded today. We're going to put the 2 segments up for tomorrow. They broke down their All-American team, their preseason top 25, and some other topics today. So that'll be on the CFB Nation channel tomorrow. Bill does a great job, very fair. I think they try to do right with their All-American rankings, but it matters. Their All-American rankings matter because Sporting News is one of the 5 what are considered the main All-American teams, and by that I mean those are the 5 that determine whether you're a consensus or unanimous All-American. There's a lot of other. ESPN has one, The Athletic, CBS Sports. There's all types of All-America teams, but it's Sporting News. It's Associated Press, it's Walter Camp, it's the Football Writers Association of America, and the American Football Coaches Association. Those are the 5 All-American teams that make up whether you're unanimous or consensus. Obviously, last year, Joe Walton and Xavier Watts were unanimous, which meant they were first team on Sporting News, and then the other 4. Notre Dame had 5 players that were named All-Americans by CBS Sports, by Sporting News today. And they were 3 on the first team, 1 on the second team offense, and then 1 on the second team special teams. So Notre Dame was obviously a team that was very well represented on that list. You know what I did not do? I did not go look and see how many each team had. I'm actually going to kind of do that as we're talking. I'm seeing if Bill wrote about that. He said, looks like Ohio State had the most. Ohio State's had 7 players on their All-America team. Notre Dame was second with 5. That was more than Alabama and Georgia, who each had 4. Michigan, Oregon, and Texas each had 3. So Notre Dame had the most first team All-Americans All-Americans total. And here's an interesting thing, reading through Bill's note, Ohio State had the most, but 5 of their 7 were second team players. And Georgia, looking at Georgia's list, 2 of Georgia's 4 were on the first team. So that means the other 2 were on the second team. And Alabama, Alabama had, they had their center, the transfer from Washington, Caleb Downs, and a kicker. So Bama had 3 on their first team as well, including a specialist. So Notre Dame and Michigan and Alabama looks like tied for the most first teamers. And so that's a very interesting statistic, and it's kind of a bit of a like a prequel, right? A preview, so to speak, of the topic I'm going to get into today. When I talk about how talented this Notre Dame team is, guys, this isn't just me, a Notre Dame fan, a Notre Dame analyst, a Notre Dame podcaster, all the different hats that I wear. That's just hyping up his team. This is outsiders film. So ESPN has Notre Dame ranked 5th. You talk about the Walter Camp preseason All-American list. They had 4 guys on there. They had Xavier Watts, Howard Cross, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Harrison. Others had 5, with Mitchell Evans being the 5th on other preseason lists. So this isn't just Irish Breakdown saying, hey, we're excited about this team, but nobody else is. There's a lot of excitement about it. And the fact that 5 guys made the preseason Sporting News list. And I know that team. I know their process a little bit. I've talked to their guys about their process in the past. They do a lot of research. They ask people questions. They want data. So, for example, I know for a fact that one of the factors that went into the decision-making for their first-team All-America cornerbacks, of which Benjamin Morrison is one. I should have led with this. The 3 first-team All-Americans for Notre Dame were Howard Cross, Xavier Watts, and Benjamin Morrison. Second team was Mitchell Evans, a tight end, and Jaden Harrison as a kick returner. But I know for a fact that one of the things that they factored into for having Benjamin Morrison on the first team was looking at his Pro Football Focus numbers, where he was in completion percentage, numbers for targets, and all that kind of stuff. They took into account how he handled Marvin Harrison Jr. the last 2 years. So they do their research, and I really respect that and appreciate that. I actually texted one of their guys today, and I was like, thank you for putting Travion Henderson on the All-American squad and not Quinshon Judkins, because that tells me that they're not going with what the the hype is they're going with the guy that they feel is the better player and that they project to have a better year. And I tend to agree with them. But I think TreVeyon Henderson is a significantly better running back than Quinshon Judkins if he can just stay healthy. That's going to be the big thing for TreVeyon. But it is still a big honor for Notre Dame to have 3 first-team All-Americans on the defense. And obviously you have two other players on the second team. As I said, perception matters a lot, folks. It does. It matters when it comes to the human factor of rankings. It matters when it comes to the perception among, with recruits, the perception within your program, the expectations. Guys have to know what the expectations are. And there's just a lot of different ways where the perception matters. And when you talk about Notre Dame being a consensus top 10 team, you talk about Notre Dame having more preseason All-Americans than Georgia or Alabama or Michigan or Oregon or Texas, you start to understand why there's the excitement that there is for Notre Dame. Now Notre Dame needs to go out there and back that up. That's going to be the final step for this. But quite an honor for Xavier Watson, Benjamin Morrison, and Howard Cross, and Mitchell Evans and Jaden Harrison. Quite an honor. And the crazy thing, you want to talk about how much talent Notre Dame has. Jaden Harrison's, by everyone that I've seen, is either a first or second team preseason All-American as a kick returner. He does not have the highest kick return average for a Notre Dame returner from last year. Jadarian Price does. It just kind of speaks to the kind of playmakers that Notre Dame has. But it also shows, when that list shows kind of why Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia, Bama, Oregon, Texas are all considered teams that are going to be really good football teams this year, because there are a lot of those All-American type of players. And if you want to know why some people still have Michigan as being a top 10 to 15 team, it's right there. It speaks to it. They've got 3 guys on the first team All-America squad. Will Johnson, Mason Graham, and then of course their tight end Colston Loveland. And I was actually asked this by somebody recently, like, would I have Mitchell Evans as my first team All-American or Colston Loveland? And I said I'd have Colston Loveland as my first team All-American, just because I don't know that I'd say he's more talented than Mitchell Evans, but he's certainly more proven, and he proved that he could stay healthy. And when you got 2 pretty good players, that has to matter. And I thought he was pretty clutch last year as well. He was a money player, just like Mitchell Evans was. So that is the preseason All-America discussion. That's just some news that I wanted to get out there to you guys. And it's just another bit of evidence that tells us why Notre Dame is considered such a team that has a chance to really make a run. And I'm going to dive more into that in segment 2 of today's show, which is going to be looking at the reasons to be optimistic about this Notre Dame football team. But before I get there, do me a favor, folks. If you have not already done so, hit that like button for me. Make sure you have subscribed to our channel. Make sure that you are turn your notification bells on so you they let you know when we put new shows up. Just to give you guys a heads up as well, we are starting to cut these shows up. We've always done it on our podcast platform, and you can subscribe to our podcast. Apple's our partners at Spotify, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can subscribe to us there. That's always a great way of supporting our channel. Financially, it definitely does a lot better for us than the YouTube channel does, but we love both of them. But you can always listen to our show on our podcast, and we've always cut them into segments there. We're also starting to do that on our videos. So we're actually starting to take the videos and cut them up by segment. So this first segment will get broken down and put out by itself. This next segment about the reason to be optimistic will be cut up, put out by itself. So you guys can, if you want to go back, you don't have to listen to this whole show again. You can listen to the smaller segments and put them out that way, or check them out that way. So we are starting to do that as well. They usually go up the next morning. So we do a show today, we'll put this one up the next morning, and that's usually how we're going to be doing it from now on. So if it's something that's a little bit news breaking, then we will try to get that up a little bit quicker, but that's kind of what our plan is going to be. So you can find the segments broken up a little bit more on our video podcast. For these types of shows, we won't do it for like mailbag or buy sell holds. Those will just kind of be what they are. We'll still break them up on the podcast platform, but not the video. But we're going to start breaking these things up and starting to give you guys a little bit smaller doses of it so you can consume it a little bit easier when you go back on the rewatch. So I just want to let you guys know that. And you can, of course, find that by being a subscriber and making sure you've hit that notification bell for our podcast. And as always, if you really, really want to be a part of our community as deep as you can and get all the intel, all the scoop, including stuff we don't talk about in the podcast, you can sign up for a message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can be a monthly subscriber. We are cheaper than anybody else. You can do an annual subscription, also cheapest. Or if you really want to go above and beyond, you can become a subscriber. You can become a part of our booster club. We have a Shamrock Club, a Blue Club, and a Gold Club. If you join one of those clubs, you also get some free IB merch. If you join the Shamrock or Blue Club, you get a free IB Club mug. Only goes to club members. I don't even have one. It's only club members. I have no Gold Club gear, no Gold Club shirts, no IB Club mug. That only goes to subscribers. If you join the Gold Club, you get not only the mug, but you also get an IB Gold Club t-shirt. We have them in 5 different colors. It has this logo on it, and it'll either, if you get green, it'll have this blue logo on it. If you get one of the other colors, it'll have the green logo on it. And then underneath right here, it'll say Gold Club right under here. So and those again only go to Gold Club members. So it's just a way that you can support us. We greatly appreciate it. And then, of course, you get some cool merch to go with it as well. I'm also working on revamping the merch store. So I'm hoping to have some new merch on there and just have some things rearranged and organized there as well. So you can check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So we talked about this yesterday, right? I think you guys had as much fun watching the show yesterday as I did doing it. It was just a really fun show, talking about, the rankings, because we put a lot of thought into it. We put a lot of thought into rankings. Like, I go through all the schedules. I'm going to have my conference predictions coming out here over the next week or so, where I actually literally go through and predict every game. So that way I can have records for everybody. And so we do put thought into it, but it's meant to be fun, right? We know that we're not going to get them all right. We're going to get some right. We're going to get some wrong. I always like to point out how I got it right that I had LSU in the college football playoff in 2019, but I think I also had Notre Dame, and obviously I was wrong on that one. I had Washington last year, but I think I also had Georgia on there last year, so those are things that we're going to get some right. We're going to get some wrong. It's meant to be fun. And the reason it was even more fun this year is because as we're kind of going through it, you're just like, Vince and I were talking like, dude, I really like this matchup for Notre Dame against this team and that team, where in past years it'd be like, well, it was a good run. It's going to end right here. And that's something to be excited about, because there is a raised bar for Notre Dame right now, in my opinion. There certainly is in my eyes, but I think it's also nationally. I think there's a national change. There's a shift in perception with Notre Dame. And when you look at where this team is, I think part of it is because of the unknown of Marcus Freeman. And there's this perception that like Notre Dame is more talented than they've been in past years, which I think is true. That's why we see the 5 preseason All-Americans. I saw something yesterday on Twitter, and it was like picking coaches based on like who's the best, recruiter, who's the best at offense, who's the best at defense, who's the best whatever. And they had Brian Kelly as the most consistent, and they also had Brian Kelly as the choker. Now, I don't know that that's fair to say about Brian Kelly. We've talked about that, to call him a choker. I don't know that there was a lot of big games that Brian Kelly lost where he was the significantly better team and they choked it away. I don't think that's a fair assessment, but to say he doesn't win big games is a very fair assessment. But I think the reason that's relevant to this is because how you perceive the head coach is going to be how you perceive a program. And for a long time, right or wrong, fair or not, Notre Dame was capped under Brian Kelly. That was the perception. They were only going to take you so far. Well, the perception of Marcus Freeman is they're adding more talent than they have in the past, not just in high school, but also in the portal. And when you look at this Notre Dame football team, there's some portal players that people are very fired up about nationally, not just in the Notre Dame world, but nationally. And it's funny, I get a lot of Notre Dame people that are they'll much poo-poo kind of Chris Mitchell, for example. Even had somebody in the chat yesterday thought that I'd kind of dismiss Chris Mitchell, but you get, I got to see it. But every time I talk to someone who's not affiliated with Notre Dame and you bring up Chris Mitchell, they're very high on him. I talked about this. I was on with Cole Kubelic the other day from ESPN. I was on his his podcast, and I brought up Chris Mitchell. And he talked about how he'd seen Chris Mitchell in person doing a game. He's down in the field, and how high he was on him. And obviously there's a lot of people excited about Bo Collins, and Jaden Harrison's a preseason second-team All-American kick returner. Riley Leonard, R.J. Open, Rod Hurd are all guys, Jordan Clark are all guys that people are very excited about. So there's this perception that the talent has been raised. And so you look at this football team, and it's fun to talk about, but it also means there's higher expectations. And when you look at this Notre Dame football team, you have to ask yourself, what's the ceiling? Not, okay, big picture for Notre Dame just in general is championships, right? That's the standard at Notre Dame. Win a championship, compete for championship. And it is the standard, and it should always be the standard in regard to what's the ultimate goal. But not every team is a championship team. Not every Knute Rockne team was a championship. Knute Rockne was a coach for 10 years, 10 or 11 years, at least 10, over 10 years, and only won, I think, 2 titles. Frank Leahy was a head coach for a decade. He won 4 titles. Or Parsegian was a head coach for over, I think, 11 seasons, and he only won 2 titles. Lou Holtz was a head coach from 1986 to 1996, I believe, and he only won 1 title. So a lot of those great coaches that are legends that have statues that built Notre Dame, they didn't win a championship every year. But what is your ceiling as a program? What can you be if you maximize your potential? And this Notre Dame team, in my view, is one that I believe their ceiling is that of a title contender. That doesn't mean they're going to win it. I don't know if they're going to win it. I can't read minds, and I can't see into the future. Wish I could. That would be a little scary, but also pretty cool. But that's how I feel like this team has a lot of things in place that you look at and say, if they maximize their potential, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody. Now, there's some other teams that can go toe-to-toe with Notre Dame if they play to their best. And that's what makes the postseason so fun. But this is a team that has the tools to make a deep run in the college football playoff. And by deep run, I mean winning at least 2 games. That's the sort of, it's not the ultimate ceiling, but it's the ceiling for, if they reach their full potential, they at least get here. Then after that, it depends on matchups and different things. And so that's kind of where I see this team. And so what I want to do with these next 2 segments is talk about reasons that I'm excited or optimistic that this team can reach that potential right there, that they can contend for a title. And then segment 2, part 2 will be, with that being the standard, what are 5 potentially stumbling blocks that could keep Notre Dame from getting there? But we're going to start with the positive. And we're going to start with the things that to me are the 5 areas that I look at this football team and say, it's because of this that this team has a chance to make a deeper run and go toe-to-toe with the best teams in ways where past Notre Dame teams could not. Reason number 1, and this is really what it comes, is it starts with me, the way that I think. I played and I coached the game. I always think about it from top down, coaching on down. And while we still have a lot of things we need to learn about Marcus Freeman as a head coach, he's only been head coach for 2 seasons. This is going to be year 3 for him. He's now hired 2 coordinators that are far more established, that have much longer track records. And you look at the offensive coordinator hire this offseason of Mike Denbrock. You now pair him with Al Golden, who built one of the best defenses in college football last season. We hope that he can continue that here in year 3. And you are now putting Notre Dame in the conversation of who has the best coordinator combo in college football. I don't think it's a no-brainer that Notre Dame is that pick, just like I don't think it's a no-brainer that Ohio State is that pick. There's 4 or 5 schools, we've talked about them in the past, that to me are in the conversation for best coordinators, not head coach that calls plays, coordinators in college football. And it's been a long time since Notre Dame has had that. And honestly, I don't know that I've been alive in an era where Notre Dame had that, because in a lot of years you had situations where, Lou Holtz was the play caller for Notre Dame on one side of the ball, sometimes 2. So, I mean, I'm too young to remember this, but like 1988, right? I mean, so we'll have to kind of go back to that conversation. But when I look at this Notre Dame team, there's no doubt that this group, this duo of Mike Denbrock and Al Golden, have an opportunity to become one of the best tandems in college football. And that's something that certainly gives them a great starting point, because let's be honest, there have been a lot of years where Notre Dame had a lot of talent on the roster, talent in certain coaching spots to say, you know what, this team can go toe-to-toe with a lot of people. I think the 2015 team was that way. That might be the most talented Notre Dame team we've seen since Lou Holtz was head coach. It's in the conversation. You look at that team and the quarterback depth and talent they had there, running back depth of talent. You had Will Fuller at receiver, and the other two starters were sub 4 or 5 guys. You had an offensive line that had 4 first or second round draft picks on it, and a 5th guy that would have been drafted had he not retired from football to go pursue another career. Your entire starting defensive line got played in the NFL. The only guy that didn't get drafted, Romeo Okwara, probably had the best career of all of them. You had Jalen Smith, who's one of the most special linebackers we've ever seen at Notre Dame. You had Kavari Russell, who was a high draft pick, a cornerback. Cole Luke, a cornerback on that 2015 team. Max Redfield, Elijah Shoemate. Matthias Farley started 2 years from the Indianapolis Colts. He didn't start in the 2015 Notre Dame defense, and he was a veteran. So there's been years where they had that talent. That 2015 team had Mike Denbrock at OC. You had Harry Heastan on offensive line. So there were some pieces in place for that team to be dynamic. But what was the concern going into that year? I said it then. I say it now. The stumbling block for that team was going to be your strength coach and your coordinators, your defensive coordinator. Strength coach, I don't know about with this team. I don't know a lot about Lauren Lando, and we're going to all find out together. But in 2015, you knew for a fact that they were going to have a problem. You were going to have to overcome your coordinator. And if you're trying to overcome your coordinator, your chances of competing for a championship are not great. Not great. Let's just say hypothetically, let's assume this happens. Let's assume that in 2015, that Notre Dame goes to the college football playoff. Let's just say hypothetically that they would have somehow found a way to win, to knock off Clemson at the end of that game in 2015. And Torrey Hunter, scores that last touchdown. They call a little something different in the college in that last 2-point conversion play. That game goes a little differently at the end. Okay, let's just say that happens. And Notre Dame goes into Stanford, ranked number 2, whatever their ranking would have been, and they beat Stanford. They don't give up that last field goal at the end of the game. Let's just say hypothetically that was the case. Notre Dame's number 1 seed that season, maybe number 2. What was Bama's record that year? Do you guys remember? Was Bama undefeated going into No, Bama, that was not an undefeated Bama team. They lost to Ole Miss. So Notre Dame would have been the 1 seed. What is your confidence level that Notre Dame, A, would have been able to beat Oklahoma in the first round with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, and then beat Alabama in round 2 with Derrick Henry at running back, with Brian Van Gorder as your defensive coordinator? A guy who had literally the worst 3-year stretch of run defense in Notre Dame history. What are the odds of that happening? I don't feel good about that. I know you all don't feel good about that, because you had a stumbling block that was at your coordinator level. There were other years where you felt good about the defensive side of the ball, but you didn't feel good about the offensive side of the ball, right? It's been this back and forth. And this is probably the most confident I've been in Notre Dame's coordinators since 2018. And going into 2019, when you had Chip Long, who I thought did a great job in 2017 at Notre Dame. You had Clark Lee replacing Mike Elko. I said back then I felt that was a good hire. But the difference now is, even though I feel way better about this group than I did that. That was the last year I went into a season thinking that you felt really good about both coordinators going into the season, with Clark Lee going in his first year as coordinator, but he'd been the linebackers coach under Mike Elko the year before. I thought he was going to keep going what Coach Elko had established, and he did. And then, of course, Chip Long built on his success from 2017. Felt great about that team going into 2018 from a coordinator standpoint. And what happened? That team went 12-0, made it to the college football playoff, beat Michigan in a huge game at the start of the season, handled their business against everybody else. You beat a top 15 Syracuse team by 33 on a neutral field in November. You beat a ranked Northwestern team on the road. You did what you needed to do with that football team in 2017 or 2015. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, 2018. Excuse me, 2018. And I'm even more confident in the coordinators here because it's more established on both sides of the ball. With Chip Long, he had done some good things at Memphis and had a really good year in 2017, but it was still kind of, okay, I like him. He's going to do a good job, but how good is he going to do? And then with Clark Lee, I thought, I said at the time, if you got the chops, you got the chops. And I thought he had the chops, and he proved that as a coordinator, he had the chops. Did he ever have a defense as dominant as the one Al Golden had last year? Nope. And so I look at these coordinators, and I'm very, very optimistic that Notre Dame is going to be able to go into every game they play this year and say, from a game planning standpoint, a play calling standpoint, overall and in big moments, they finally have a coaching staff in place on both sides of the ball that give you a chance to win games. Well, let me rephrase it. You're not going to lose games, in my opinion, because you're not coached well enough or don't have enough experience or talent at that position. I think Notre Dame's going to be able to go toe-to-toe with the best when it comes to a coaching standpoint this season, and that has often not been the case at Notre Dame in the past when you look at it from the coordinators on both sides of the ball. Reason number 2, talent. And there's really 2 ways of looking at this. You know, I did a show earlier this summer where I talked about, to be a great team, I believe you need stars. There aren't a lot of teams that have won at an elite level without stars. You could somewhat argue last year that Michigan didn't have any stars. I would push back on that. I do think Michigan had some stars on their team last year. They had some first-team All-American type players, first-round draft pick type players, and that's probably the closest that we've seen. But you really need those impact, high-level, first-team All-American type of players. You can't win championships with just a bunch of good players. You're going to be better than maybe your overall talent should dictate. I am a believer in college football that the sum can be greater than the parts. It's something I've argued about Bama for years. I've said this for a long time. I felt for years Alabama's been getting players overdrafted constantly. There's been some guys that were legit stars. Everybody knew Derrick Henry was going to be a star. I mean, there's been guys like that. There's been a lot of guys drafted in round 1 that should have been drafted in round 2, round 3, or sometimes even lower. But they get drafted high. Why? Because they played at Bama. And what I always felt about Bama is they'd have their stars, but they just had a lot of good football players. And a lot of those good football players people thought were stars. And you know, really weren't. But even then, they still had those stars at the top. You can go back to those teams that Alabama had won titles, and they had star players. You know, Clemson had star players. Florida State had star players. Why did Auburn win a title in 2010? It's one reason and one reason only. They had the ultimate star in the game in that year in Cam Newton. You have to have star talent. It doesn't have to be elite top 5 overall draft pick star talent, but you need college football stars to win championships. And Notre Dame has that. Their high-level talent is as good as it's been in a long time. Do they have the generational talent like a Jalen Smith, like a Quentin Nelson, like a Will Fuller? That I don't know about. That I'm not sure of. But they have stars, and they have more than they've had in a lot of years. And the only team that, to me, can come close to this team in regard to saying they had more high-level stars, 2012 and 2015. That's it, as far as since 2010. You can go back to like the Brady Quinn era, and they've had some teams like that, but this team has that. You need that. And, you know, Riley Leonard can be a star. Talent-wise can be a star. You've got 2 running backs that have star talent. You have, you know, do you have any receivers? I don't know. But you have a tight end that when healthy is that way. On defense, though, you have more established stars. You have Xavier Watts, who was a unanimous All-American and was the Nagurski Award winner last year. You have Benjamin Morrison, who's established himself as one of the top players in college football. Certainly one of the top defensive backs in all of college football. You have Howard Cross, who's coming back. I don't know that I would put Howard Cross in the star category. I had that debate when I talked about it before. But his production, his level of play is certainly garnered that type of status. And then there's potential breakout stars, and I mentioned them on offense at quarterback and running back. I think there's some guys who could be that at receiver. Billy Schrouth could be that guy at guard. Riley Mills could be that guy at defensive tackle. Does a Josh Burnham, does a Boubacar Traore, does a Drake Bowen, does a Jalen Sneed, does Kingston Vilama Asa, do one of those, does Christian Gray, do one of those guys also emerge and become stars? Because a lot of teams that won championships had guys like that kind of broke out and were key members of what they were trying to do. Notre Dame has way more established stars and then potential stars than they've had in a long time. Like some of the best teams they had, like 2012, I mean, you had your stars, right? You had Zach Martin, you had Tyler Eifert, you had Stephon Tuitt, Lewis Nix, Manti. After that, was there anybody else that you looked at and said, that guy might be a star? No, there's a lot of good football players. Theo Riddick was a good football player, not a star. TJ Jones, good football player, not a star. Capron Lewis Moore, really quality football player, not a star. Kavari Russell maybe could have been in that conversation, but there just wasn't a lot of that, where this team has that top level talent, but a lot of other potential players that could be on the verge of becoming that type of player. And the same is true in 2015 with that team. So the talent at the top is there. There's a second aspect to talent, however, and this is what has often separated Notre Dame from the top teams. You go back and look at 2022 and 2023. I'd contend that if you take the 5 best players in Notre Dame and stack them up against the 5 best players against Ohio State, it's very close. I've felt that about 2015 team for sure, the 2017 team, the 2018 team, and the 2012 team for sure. And I'll take the 2011 team of Tyler Eifert, Michael Floyd, Zach Martin, Manti Te'o, and Harrison Smith and stack that up against anybody's 5 best players. The difference, however, is Ohio State, obviously the quarterback was a difference. But when you look at Ohio State, when you get down to players 8, 9, 10, 11, 15, 20, starters, they were always much better than where Notre Dame was in those same areas. I think Notre Dame has still got the star power, but the depth of talent is different on this team than it has been in a long time. And I think that's a big difference in the past, because it's not just, oh, shoot, if Howard Cross isn't this, right? So like one of the questions that Brandon Rouse had says, why not Cross? I think Cross is a very good football player. I don't think he's a star takeover games type of guy like Stephon Tuitt was, like Sheldon Day was in 2015. And I'm not going to compare him to like the Aaron Donalds. That's different. Those guys were just super freaky generational guys. I just mean, looking at the best players, an elite guy like Howard Cross, if he was a star, has more than 7 tackles for loss and 2 sacks with the way that he plays, and half of that production came against Duke. He's a very good football player. Is he a takeover games week after week type of you have to game plan around him or you're in trouble kind of guy? I don't think so. But here's the thing. They don't necessarily need him to be, because he's not a solo star. He's not a solo standout. He's got Riley Mills as his sidekick, right? He's got Jason Onye and Gabriel Rubio eventually, and Donovan Heinisch and different players coming in with him behind him. So you don't need to rely on Howard as much this year as you did last year, where last year if Howard just kind of played okay and Riley just kind of played okay, your defense suffered mightily. I don't think that's going to be the case this year. You're going to be more talented at defensive end. We got to see if the production matches. You're going to be more talented. You're going to be more talented at Viper now that Boubacar Traore is into the mix. You're going to be more talented at linebacker even than you were last year. Now, will you be as experienced? Will you produce as much? Will you be as assignment correct? All very fair questions, but the talent's there. Notre Dame is right now, Armel Mukum is battling to be your 5th defensive tackle. When Gabriel Rubio comes back, Armel is going to be battling to be your 6th defensive tackle. The last time that Notre Dame made the college football playoff in 2020, and you could go back to both times. You could go back to 2018 as well. There is no doubt that Armel Mukum is in the 2 deep. No doubt. Now he's battling to be in the 3 deep. That's how talented Notre Dame is. there's no doubt that guys right now that we're looking at that probably aren't going to play would have been two deep players on the last two playoff teams. And there's guys that are backups now that would have been starters on the 2020 team in the secondary. We look at cornerback, and right now we're like, I don't know if Christian Gray is going to beat out Jaden Mickey. Here's the reality. Either one of them would have started opposite of Nick McLeod in 2020. Both of them would have started opposite Nick McLeod. And so that's it's a much deeper team in regard to talent. There's talent at the top, the stars, and then what's your depth of talent. And the one thing that Ohio State, Michigan in recent seasons, say whatever you want to say about the cheating, but the NFL draft clearly bought into Michigan's talent because they had a bunch of guys picked this last year. Georgia, Alabama, teams like that consistently. Back when USC was winning a ton under Pete Carroll, they always had a ton of guys drafted. Why? Because it wasn't just your top 4 or 5 stars. They had NFL football players throughout their roster. They would have backups get drafted. Notre Dame used to have backups get drafted. Go look at the Lou Holtz era. They had backup DBs, guys that started very few games, were kind of sidekick type DBs getting drafted in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round when Lou Holtz was the head coach of Notre Dame. That's how loaded they were. That's how loaded they were back then. And Notre Dame is not quite there yet, but they're getting really close to that at a lot of positions. There's a couple you could argue that they are, but they're much deeper than they've been in a lot of years. And that's important because I believe they have star power, but do they have the generational talent that some championship teams have had and may have this year? Do they have a quarterback? Riley Leonard's going to be, I think, the best quarterback Notre Dame's had in several years. But can he elevate a team the way that Deshaun Watson did, the way that Jameis Winston did, Cam Newton did? I'm not asking him to be those players, but be an elevator to where you're just so much better because he's your quarterback. We're going to find that out. I don't know that Notre Dame has a ton of that, especially on offense, but they have guys that could be stars, the next level of star. The one way to still be really, really, really good with that is that you've got, your top 5 may be slightly better than our top 5, but our 6 through 20 dominates your 6 through 20. That's how you win football games. That's how you compete for a championship. And so that's why, and that's the number 2 thing for me. You could argue that's number 1, but I still feel it's what I've said before. You guys know what I'm going to say here. I hate the expression that's the Jimmys and Joes, not the X's and O's. I hate that. We have seen plenty of teams with loads of talent not be very good at football. Why? Because those Jimmys and Joes need to be put on the right path to maximizing their talent, and that's where coaching starts. So the coaching has to be the foundation, and then the talent has to get built on top of that. That's how you win. And that's why Nick Saban won at Alabama. Yes, he had talent, but there's been teams with talent, teams that he beat that had more talent, in my opinion, than he had, and teams that beat him that had less talent than he had because they had really, really good coaching. What could Ohio State do in 2014 against Bama that maybe a lot of other teams couldn't do? Yeah, they could match them talent for talent. But what else could that 2014 team do? And they could coach with them, with Urban Meyer and Tom Herman and Chris Ash and guys like that. They could coach with them as well. And that's a big part of it. So you need the foundation of the strong coaching. I think they have that at the coordinator level, certainly. But also the talent, this top-level talent, and then the depth of talent is important. Now more specific, both sides of the ball. Another reason for optimism. Won't spend a ton of time here because it's obvious. We've talked a lot about the individual players. But you look at it and say the defense, right? The defense is – I've said this a million times. I don't believe defense wins championships anymore the way it used to. But I have always said defense gets you to the show. Unless you've got a 2019 LSU offense, defense gets you to the show. Defense can get you to the semis. You want to win a championship, you better have an offense. But defense is going to take you a very long way. And this defense is what, to me, can determine if you're going to be able to avoid upsets. If you're a team that relies on outscoring people, if your offense has any kind of off performance, you're going to get beat more often than not against good teams. Defense is what helps you avoid slumps if you have an elite defense. It's not the end all be all, as we saw last year, but when you have a top level defense, that gives you a great chance to be a very good football team. And I do believe this Notre Dame defense has a chance to be that. Little bit of turnover this offseason, not something that should impact the team a whole lot. You obviously lost Chris O'Leary. Mike Mickens takes over the entire secondary. You've got Max Bulla now as a full-time coach. Al Golden is still here. Al Washington is still here. A lot of those guys are now going into year 3, right? Mike Mickens is going into year 5. So 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Year 5 for Mike Mickens. Max Bulla is going into year 2 at Notre Dame. So Marty Biagi's helping out. He's going into year 2. And we saw what kind of jump year 2 was for a lot of coaches last year. We saw what kind of year 2 jump we saw even from Mike Mickens and what we saw from him in 2020 compared to 2021, where the secondary got a lot better in 2021 compared to where it was in 2020. Not completely there yet. And then obviously going into year 3, it took an even bigger jump than it did before. So you've got that continuity on defense, coaching wise. You've got star power coming back on defense on all levels, right? I mean, you've got the defensive lineman. I look at cornerback as kind of level 2 to a varying degree. A lot of people count it level 3. That's fine. It's not something that I would say that you're wrong. I just look at it differently. The way that Notre Dame plays, I look at it differently because they do so much man. You've got Benjamin Morrison there. And then, of course, you've got your star at safety and Xavier Watts. You've got a lot of experience coming back at very important positions. Another thing, you guys, there's certain things I say a lot. And the reason I say those things a lot is because they're important. They never change. There's something that is always true, in my opinion, in college football. If you're going to be a team unless you have a 2019 LSU type of team on offense, if you want to be a championship contender, you've got to be great right up the middle on defense. D tackle, inside backer, safety. Well, you've got a 6th-year senior coming back at nose tackle and a 5th-year senior coming back at D tackle that are multi-year starters. You've got a will linebacker that's going into his 6th year that's been a 3-year starter. And you've got an all-American safety coming back, and he's now joined by a 5th-year senior that's had over 2,000 snaps in football the last 2 years at Northwestern. I believe I'm correct on that. I think it might be the last 3 years. As soon as I said that, I was like, wait a minute, that's a lot of snaps. Is that what his number was? I know he had over 2,000 the last 3 years, but maybe it was the last 2 years because I know he had 853 last. I'm talking about Rod Hurd. He had 853. It's the last 3 years. He's had over 2,000 the last 3 years. I knew that didn't make a lot of sense. But this is a kid that had 853 snaps in the Big Ten last year, 745 snaps in the Big Ten the year before that, and 468 snaps year before that. He's got 2,270 career snaps. And he is now the sidekick to Xavier Watts at that position. So you've got a lot of experience right up the middle. And then also you mix in, now Jason Onye is a senior. He's got, now more time in that. Donovan Heinisch is now a junior. They're both older. You've got Don Schuler, Drake Bowen are the sort of that young talent, but you're not asking your sophomores to be the guy in a way that you have in the past because yes, Drake Bowen has to do a lot. So does Kingston Villalma-Asa. So will Jalen Sneed. But they're going to have that 6th-year senior leadership and those tackles right in front of them fill a lot of that void. On the edge, on the perimeter, you got a 5th-year senior and a 6th-year senior at your 2 edge positions on defense. You've got a junior as your boundary corner who's now a 3-year starter. So you've got a 6th-year senior at nickel mixed in with a lot of young talent. And that's where I start to have a lot of optimism because it's this really weird, they're either a 5th or 6th-year senior or a freshman or a sophomore. There's like very few juniors that are like, you've got Burnham and you've got Morrison and you've got Jalen Sneed. But outside of that, a lot of your depth charts, like, Mickey, a lot of your depth charts, 5th or 6th-year guys are freshmen and sophomores in a lot of places. And so there is that unique blend, but you have so much experience that your defense should be in position to continue building on what it established last year. And that's kind of where I look at it and start to get a little bit excited about what this football team can be because the defense has a chance to be so special I think that's another reason that I'm optimistic that this team has a chance to be a championship contender in 2024. Reason number 4, offensive weapons. This is one that's probably the most debatable amongst the fans. And it's understandable because there's a lot of fans that, especially folks that have been are my age and older or slightly younger, sort of in this generation of fans that got a taste of that greatness that we saw under Lou Holtz and older fans even more so, like they saw it under Divine and Era and all that type of stuff. But like for my age, I was 10 when Notre Dame won the last national title. And I remember it. I still remember watching the USC game that year at my friend Jamison Jennings' house. They had one of those big satellite TVs with a big old huge satellite in the backyard, watching Tony Rice and Rocket and Stan Smagala with the pick six and all that type of stuff. I remember that. Very memorable time in my life as a Notre Dame fan. It was when I kind of first became a Notre Dame fan. But it's been kind of bitter since then. You had a couple, great years under Coach Holtz. 89 was a great team. 93 was a great team. But by and large, it's been a lot of disappointment, and especially on the offensive side of the ball as of late. And the receiver position has been incredibly disappointing as of late. Notre Dame has not had a receiver drafted since 2020. They have not had a single wide receiver drafted since 2020. They haven't had a first-round draft pick at receiver since 2016. We're getting close to a decade since Notre Dame has had a first-round draft pick at receiver. They haven't had a first- or second-round draft pick at running back since, I think, Reggie Brooks and Jerome Bettis, I believe, is the last time that Notre Dame has had a running back. They've had a lot of third-round draft picks, but I don't believe – I'm actually going to look that up because I do believe – it is so Audric was a 5th-round pick last year. Kyron was a 5th-round pick. Dex was a 6th-round pick. CJ Prosise was a 3rd-round pick. Theo was a 6th-round pick. Julius Jones, 2004 was the last time that Notre Dame had a 2nd or 1st-round draft pick at running back. Prior to that, you have to go back to, you had some 1997, you had a fullback and Mark Edwards. Ray Zellers is a fullback in 1992. You've got to go back to all the way to 1993. 1993, when Jerome Bettis was taken in the 1st round, as Notre Dame had a 1st-round draft pick at running back, and Reggie Brooks was a 2nd-round pick that year. So, yeah, there's a lot of, you got to show me. Now, I do think there's more optimism amongst fans at running back because we haven't seen the high level, like, oh my gosh, Jerome Bettis, Reggie Brooks, elite game, takeover game, elite running backs. We've seen some really good running backs that have gone on to play in the NFL. So there's a little bit more optimism there. But at receiver, I understand, quarterback, I understand some of the skepticism. And it's not fair and not overly productive. But as fans, we're going to look at things and say, well, because Sam Hartman didn't pan out, and because you may feel a certain way about Jack Cohn, that equals Riley Leonard is not this. Okay, that's not really productive, and those two things have nothing to do with each other, but I understand it. I really do. And it's like, yeah, we've been here before. You guys liked Sam Hartman last year. True, but not like this guy. And as I said before, I had to kind of talk myself into feeling good about Sam Hartman. Riley Leonard's a different deal. We've been praising him as a great player since before we had any clues he's going to be in the portal. But I understand that skepticism. I need to see it in a Notre Dame uniform. Wide receiver, as I mentioned earlier with Chris Mitchell, there's a lot of with Chris Mitchell. Why? Played at Florida International. We're in a chat yesterday, and people were trying to talk down success. Yeah, well, he did it in this Conference USA. Okay. Well, what about when he went on against an SEC team? Well, yeah, but they weren't very good. Okay, but how about the fact that he outperformed, Malik Neighbors and Bryan Thomas against that same defense? Well, yeah, but he only has 6 touchdowns. But there's all this talking down of the transfer receivers by not all. I mean, my guy Tommy Guns is constantly talking. He is to Bo Collins what my man Salty is to Jaden Greathouse, right? Like what Vince was to Cam Hart. You know, like he is all on board. So, I mean, there's certainly some, and I think there's some optimism, but there's a big chunk that sort of have this, yeah, but I need to see it mentality. And you know what? Honestly, that's fair. That's completely fair. And I don't even have an issue with that. But here's where I'm at on it. Okay. I'm actually excited about this talent because for two reasons. It's similar to my overall talent that I talked about at the team. But when I look at this offensive unit, quarterback's a little different because your two next best talents are young, unproven players, and Kenny Minchey and CJ Carr. When I look at the running back room, you could lose your top two running backs and still have two very talented, young, but very talented players on the field. As long as you have one of your top two studs, you've got a stud. And when you look at receiver, I think Chris Mitchell's got a chance to be a very good football player. I think that, I mean, look, we've seen how many highlights have we seen from Notre Dame putting out of Chris Mitchell catching a deep ball on one of the starters? Guys, these are corners that do not give up deep balls. We have 2 years of evidence of them not giving up deep balls, right? But we keep seeing Chris Mitchell running by him. Oh, okay, well, there's the reason for that. No, Bo Collins has looked as good as he looked. Jaden Greathouse continues having a great offseason. Those are reasons to be optimistic, but it's not just that. It's that you don't need Chris Mitchell to be that for your receiver room to still be really good. You don't need Jaden Greathouse to become a breakout star for this receiver room to still be really good. You don't need Bo Collins to tap into his top 100 high school potential for this receiver room to be really good. Now, if they all three miss, okay, it's going to be harder, but even then, you have Jordan Faison. You have Jaden Harrison, who's a preseason All-American as a kick returner. You have KK Smith. You have Jaden Thomas, who going into last year, the coaching staff felt was their best receiver. You've got a 5-star freshman in Cam Williams. You've got a talented wide receiver in your freshman class also in Micah Gilbert and Logan Soldate. I mean, the depth of talent is the key to where, as I said in past years, you were always like one or two guys had to be good. If they weren't, you were screwed. That's really where you really have to be. And I don't buy the notion that you have to have a star there. There's a lot of star receivers. Ohio State had the biggest star in college football last 2 years, and how many championships did they win? How many Big Ten championships did they win? None, right? I mean, heck, Marvin Harrison had never, as a starter, never won a postseason game at Ohio State because they lost to Georgia 2 years ago and lost to Missouri last year. He didn't even play in that game. You look at LSU, Malik Neighbors and Bryan Thomas, best 1-2 punch in all college football last year. What did they win? Nothing. National championship team last year, their best receiver was a tight end, and their second best receiver was Roman Wilson. Not really a star. You know, so I would argue Georgia in 2021 didn't have a star. Brock Bowers was going to be one, but I don't believe he was a star at the time. But here's the thing, I will say this. If you're not going to have a star, you better have a lot of really good players. And that's where I'm coming from with this Notre Dame football team, is you have to be a team that can throw waves of people at defenses, or you better have a star or two. And this Notre Dame football team can throw waves at people. They've got guys running reported 4.3s and 4.4s that are second and third team right now at receiver. That's how talented this group is. Jordan Faison was Notre Dame's best receiver at the end of the season last year. Jordan Faison right now is not a starter at Notre Dame. And not because he played lacrosse, just because that's how loaded they are at that position. Jaden Harrison was his team's leading receiver last year. Not going to be a starter. Might not even be number 2 at that position. Jaden Thomas was Notre Dame's best receiver last year before he got hurt. He's definitely not going to be the number 1 guy on this team, and he may not even start. That this team is loaded with talent there. And then, of course, you throw in the fact that they have the talent at running back, talent at quarterback. They actually have the talent to go out there and be a really, really explosive offense. Now, do they have to put it together? Yes. Am I saying right here that Notre Dame is going to be an elite offense this year? No, sir. No, ma'am. I am not. Am I sitting here saying that I am? There's no doubt in my mind. They're flat out. They're going to go out there. They're going to do this, 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 and this. I'm predicting this, 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 and this. And if you disagree with me, you don't know what you're talking about. No, sir. No, ma'am. I am not. What I'm saying is simply this. This part to me is not arguable. This is the deepest group of offensive skill talent that Notre Dame has had in over 20 years. They may not have a Jeff Samardzija on this roster. They may not have a Will Fuller on this roster, but what they have is a deep group of players that are really talented athletes. And when you have that, the margin for error for you from week to week is significantly better in your advantage. It's significantly smaller. Or actually, I'd say bigger. You have a much bigger margin for error because if your whole season is wrapped around, we need number 10 to do here what he did at Florida International. Well, what if you have a team that can lock him down? What if he's got a little minor hammy? What if he's just not playing well in that game? You're in trouble. Or, man, we need Jaden Greathouse to be a stud for Notre Dame if they're going to be this team. And if he struggles, they're in trouble. That's been the case for a lot of Notre Dame offenses in recent years. Well, what if they play a team that's got a great nickel? What if he's got a hammy? What if he's not playing well? What if they double team him and took him out of the game? You're in trouble. That's what when teams could take Michael Mayer out of the game, Notre Dame was in trouble. When Kevin Austin had a bad game, Notre Dame was in trouble. You go along the line, down the list of these players. If Chris Mitchell's not playing well, or if he's getting double teamed, all right, that's cool. You've got backups and going. You got Jordan Faison that you can put in the game. You got KK Smith you can put in the game. You can put Jaden Thomas out there. You can put Jane Greathouse out there, right? When you look at, want Jaden Thomas step up. In the past years, if Jaden Thomas didn't step up, completely screwed your boundary depth chart. Now, if he doesn't step up or he gets hurt again, you got Bo Collins. You've got Micah Gilbert. You can put Cam Williams over there. You've got plenty of options that you can go over there. Jaden Greathouse could go over there, and he'll be better positioned to play that this year than he did last year. The point is, if you double team one of those weapons, if your game plan is we got to stop Mitchell Evans, we got to stop Jaden Greathouse, we got to stop Bo Collins, we got to stop Jaden Thomas, we got to stop Chris Mitchell, whoever that may be, the answer is then, okay, but then how do you stop that guy? And then also, how do you do that and stop Riley Leonard or Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price? Okay, you're going to double team Jaden Greathouse because he's coming off of a 9-catch, 150-yard, 2-touchdown performance against whoever. Okay, cool. Put all your effort into stopping him and Mitchell Evans. How are you going to defend the outside against Chris Mitchell, Bo Collins, Jaden Thomas? How are you going to handle Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price coming out of the backfield? How are you going to handle Riley Leonard? Right? Like, you can't stop that many players. Just can't. And that's what makes this team, to me, potentially dangerous. Now, they got to prove it. But when you look at those offensive weapons, when you look at that talent, it certainly gets you fired up. Very fired up about how good this team could be. I mean, I made a comment the other day. I mentioned Mitchell Evans is my team MVP for offense, or my offensive MVP. I feel that this team is completely different when Mitchell Evans is in the game compared to when he's not in the game. And I'm someone who is very high on Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan, those guys. But immediately as soon as I said that, you had people in the chat talking about Eli Raridan. And I'm kind of like, I'm not going to argue with you. But to this point, that kind of makes the point, right? Like, okay, you lose Mitchell Evans. That sucks. But you've got Eli Raridan that you can bring in. You've got Cooper Flanagan that you can throw in there. There's not a lot of teams that can do that. There's not a lot of teams that can lose this player, and you've got another athlete coming up. And that's what's different about this Notre Dame team. It's the margin for error is much, much wider. And there's speed all over on this offensive team. Now they just got to put it all together. And then my fifth reason why I believe this team is set up to make a run is the schedule. Not the way that some of you think I'm going to go with this one. I'm talking about it from this regard. I think the schedule is challenging, but not unnecessarily so. I think that this schedule has a nice mix of road and away. You're never home too much. You're never on the road too much. You don't have the back-to-back gauntlet that you've had in other seasons as well. And that is a very important piece to this. I don't believe that this year's schedule is inferior to last year's schedule when you look at it from a 1 to 12 standpoint. I don't. Is there anybody on this year's schedule as good as Ohio State? Maybe not. I think it's at least debatable. But I can understand why people don't think Florida State is. I would disagree with that. But I think top to bottom, this schedule is every bit as good, if not better, than last year's schedule. It's debatable, but it's at least in the conversation. But here's what, and that's just looking at the 12 teams. Here's what made last year's schedule more challenging, however. Not opponent-wise, not harder. I actually think opponent-wise, this year's schedule is a little bit more challenging than last year's schedule. But here's the difference. Last year, 5 out of 6 games in consecutive order were NC State on the road, Ohio State, at Duke, at Louisville, home against USC. You had that one little Central Michigan thing in there, no buys in there, and then that 4-game stretch of Ohio State, Duke, Louisville, USC, 2 of those games on the road, all 4 of those games at night. So while we could debate the 12 versus 12 discussion, and I'm going to say it's not as easy as some of you think it is. My guy Ant VR, love him as a poster. He was pushing back on the notion of the schedule. He thinks the schedule's a lot softer. I think it's not softer. We can have that back and forth, and it's like there's points to be made on both sides. What is not debatable is when you take it away from the 1 to 12 and you look at the way it was put together, last year's schedule was much harder to manage through than this year's schedule is, in my opinion. Last year's schedule also did not have a bye until October 21st. You went and played in Ireland. You played at NC State, at Duke, at Louisville. You played Ohio State at home, USC at home before you had your bye week. It's not the case this year. It's a little different this year. This year, you start the season off on the road, not quite as far as Ireland, but it's far. 3 of your next 4 games are at home. Then you have a bye, and your only road game after A&M is a bus ride to West Lafayette, Indiana. You don't hop on a plane again until the middle of October, almost 2 months. Notre Dame won't have to get on a plane to go play a football game. I guess they could maybe charter a 20-minute flight to West Lafayette, but I would imagine that's going to be a bus ride, right? And so that's a much, much more manageable slate. Then you get into the late part of the season. You have that first bye in October, first week of October. Then you play 3 games. 2 of them are away from home, right? So that's one of your only 2 back-to-back road games at Georgia Tech and then Navy in East Rutherford. Neither of those are – a lot of us that flown out of South Bend know that Atlanta flight's not a brutal flight, but it's still a road game. And then you've got to go to Jersey to play Navy, but then there's another bye. And then you're home for 2 more weeks before you finish the season in New York and then out in LA. So it's a challenging schedule because there's quality opponents. It's a challenging schedule from the standpoint of you've got some back-to-back road game situations. You've got to go play some tough teams. You've got to go on the 2 of your 3 best opponents arguably are road games, because you could argue that your 3 top opponents are Texas A&M, Florida State, and USC. Some may argue Louisville. I'm fine with that. I think certainly Louisville's going to be a challenging team this year. Let's just go with the 3 ranked teams. You play 3 teams that are preseason top 25. 2 of them are on the road. But here's the thing. One's at the very beginning of the year. One's at the very end of the year. Right? And so as Kenny Moore said, the schedule's not soft, but it's more manageable. That's it. That's what I'm getting to, Kenny. It's set up much better. The buys are in a much better place. The where teams are placed, you don't really have a strong back-to-back situation. Like it's A&M or Northern Illinois or Purdue or Miami and Louisville and Stanford and Georgia Tech and Navy and Florida State and Virginia Army USC. Which one of those back-to-back games makes you say, boy, I don't know how you survive those 2 back-to-back games? There's a chance that the toughest back-to-back games Notre Dame plays all year is either Army and USC or Florida State and Virginia. Much more manageable. Much more manageable. And that is something to me that I look at this football team, and the reason that matters now more than it ever has is because in order to win a championship, you've got to then play 4 more games at the end of the year. 3 of them most likely are going to be away from home. And you're going to need to be fresh and not have to go through the typical gauntlet that's harder to recover from that Notre Dame has gone through in the past. And that's the difference between this schedule and others that maybe didn't always put Notre Dame in the best position to be successful. My pushback on teams that want to schedule soft is don't schedule softer, schedule smarter. Right? And I think Notre Dame with this schedule has done that. The only thing that I would somewhat nitpick, and I've said this before, is I would prefer that they flipped Northern Illinois and Texas A&M. That's the only difference that I would want to make. And I think there's probably some coaches at Notre Dame that would disagree with me on that because they don't want A&M to see anything that they're doing, just like A&M doesn't want Notre Dame to see anything they're doing. They may actually say, hey, look, let's just get this game over with. We get the extra week to prepare for it. Then we can go and get into our get-right schedule. Okay, cool. Debatable, right? And not wrong. I just personally, my personal preference is I kind of like to have a game at the very beginning that's kind of like, okay, it's a let's get it going type of thing for me. That's where I'm at with the schedule. So I think reason number 5 for me that this Notre Dame team has a chance to go on a title run is schedule. So to recap, the coordinators are a reason to be excited. The talent at the top plus the depth of talent is a reason to be excited. The defense should once again be an outstanding group. Number 4, your offensive weapons are as deep as you've been in a very, very long time at every single skill position. And then number 5, your schedule is challenging enough to be prepared for the postseason, but not so challenging that you're worn out for the postseason, or you've got some really tough spots where you're going to stub your toe unnecessarily because of the gauntlet you have to go through. You don't have that this year. And I think that's something that's very important when you look at the makeup of this Notre Dame football team. So those are my reasons to be optimistic. Next, I'm going to talk about potential stumbling blocks. That'll be the final segment of today's show. Before we get there, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And if you've not done so, join the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Great community, intel. I'm going to completely revamp over the next year or two our content production, which is going to focus on more unique content just for the board that I'm going to be doing, especially post-game stuff with some videos and different things like that. You are not going to want to miss out on that at all. So you definitely want to check that out and see what we have to offer. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. Give it a look. I think you guys are going to love what we're doing over there. Let's get into the final area to discuss, and that is the Notre Dame season that we think could be really, really good. What are the stumbling blocks? What are some areas of concern? And there are some. There are definitely some. There's one that I don't think that's being discussed in the chat is this notion that Mike Elko knowing Riley Leonard is advantage Texas A&M. I don't agree with that at all. Having been in a situation like that, myself as a coach and a player, Mike Elko knows how to stop Riley Leonard in a Kevin Johns offense. He has no idea how Notre Dame is going to use Riley Leonard. And Riley Leonard is not stop Riley Leonard and you win that game like it was at Duke. It's a different animal. Also, Riley Leonard is going to have a much better idea of what A&M is going to do on defense than what Mike Elko knows of what Notre Dame is going to do on offense with this unique talent. So I think it's a bit of a wash. I don't think that is a reason to be concerned. And that has nothing to do with the way Mike Elko is. I'm just telling you right now, I've been in this situation. The player going to a new team has an advantage over the coach that he played for. whether the coach is still at his old school or the new school, because I know your scheme. I know what you like to do. I know your tendencies. I know how you like to defend me. That gives to me an advantage when you're trying to defend me and you don't know the weapons I have around me. You don't know how we're going to use those weapons. So I just think that's a little bit of a misguided line of concern, in my opinion, having been there as a coach and as a player at Notre Dame. And we just don't see this. We haven't seen this be an issue in college football, in my opinion, in these type of situations. So let's get to the 5 to me that are concerns. Number 1, health. And we've already seen it. We've already seen Charles Jagusah go down with a season-ending injury. We know that Howard Cross has been dealing with some minor bumps and bruises throughout fall camp, things that he's been dealing with since the summer workouts. We know Benjamin Morrison's coming back from a shoulder injury. We know Mitchell Evans is coming off of a torn ACL. Eli Rarian has a shaky injury history. You look at a lot of these positions. Yeah, the depth is great, but how much do you really want that depth to be tested? And I go back to the 2015 season, take away the issues at defensive coordinator, but you had to deal with a lot of injuries early in the year. Malik Zaire goes down. Torian Folston goes down. Durham Smythe goes down. Jerron Jones goes down. And Sean Crawford, who's going to be a starting nickel that year, goes down. 5 starters that you were gone before the end of your second game of the year. Now, Notre Dame was able to manage that and get through it. But then as the year went on and more injuries mounted, they were less prepared to handle that depth. So then you go into the bowl game, you still don't have all those players that you lost, but now CJ Prosise is banged up, Sheldon Day's banged up, Joe Schmidt gets banged up. You've now got all these additional injuries, and I think didn't Max Redfield get suspended for that game? And you're in a situation where now you're just way too thin to be able to beat the best teams on your schedule. And so health is a concern for a team like Notre Dame. The depth of talent doesn't limit them the way that it has in the past, but it's still a concern. And it's more so a concern at a few spots. I'm concerned about Notre Dame can be a playoff team without Riley Leonard. It's going to be tougher, but they can. Can Notre Dame go on a title run without Riley Leonard in 2024? No, I don't think that they can. If you take 2 or 3, there's not a single offensive weapon that if you remove means that this team can't still be dynamic offensively. Not one. But if there's 2, 3, 4, now it becomes a problem. Can Notre Dame compete for a championship without Charles Jagusah? In theory, yes. But can you do it without Jagusah and another offensive line injury? That becomes a bigger question. So this is true for honestly every team. If I was going to talk about Georgia, Ohio State, I would talk about the same topic. Ohio State, I'd say, well, if Will Howard goes down, I'm not the biggest Will Howard fan, but if he goes down in week 1, you now have to play a young player, most likely, unless you want to go to Devin Brown, who I just don't think is the guy. I don't think he's the guy. But you look at other positions, you say, look, if they lose one of their 2 veteran tackles, that offensive line becomes a much bigger question mark, in my opinion. There's a couple. If they lose Denzel Burke, are they still going to be good at corner? Yeah, but are they going to be a lot like Notre Dame where, okay, but you're not going to be nearly as good? Yes, that is also true. There's if you lose Caleb Downs, you're still going to have a good player there, but there's a big drop-off between Caleb Downs and whoever's next, just like there's a big drop-off if Notre Dame goes from Xavier Watts to whoever's going to replace him. That's true for Ohio State. That's true for Georgia. That's true for Texas. That's true for Oregon. That's just the reality of college football. And so that certainly is the one thing that you need to be able to point to and say, hey, listen, you've got to have good health overall, but you have to have some luck with health at certain spots. There's certain spots that you can handle losing a couple guys, and there's certain spots that you can't, and you got to hope and knock on wood a little bit and be prepared to say, okay, hopefully you can stay healthy at those positions. And as long as Notre Dame stays healthy at those positions, I think they're going to have a chance to, again, be very good. But if they start to mount up, that could certainly be a stumbling block for Notre Dame getting to that next level and being a team to compete for a championship. Number 2 for me is the offensive line. This is the top area for me in specifics. So the first one is sort of a general, true for Notre Dame, true for every team that's contending for a title. It's just the nature of the beast. You can't deal with a mess of injuries and expect to get to a championship, especially now in a 16-team playoff or 16-game playoff for Notre Dame. In the past, you get a month off and you only got to win 1 game Bama could be banged up all season. As long as you get through that last game, you can get some of those guys back. You got to win one game to win a championship. Then the playoff starts in 2014. You only got to win two. You lose JT Barrett. You have Cardell Jones replacing him. You got to win two games. Let's just say hypothetically that Ohio State isn't it has to win three games. Is that third game the game where your opposition gets an idea of what you're doing with Cardell Jones? Maybe they can defend you better. Maybe you play a team with an elite run defense that can slow you down. There's all more opportunities to stumble or to stub your toe when you have to play more games. And that's especially true from an injury standpoint. When you look at number two, this is the one that's most specific to Notre Dame and my concerns for Notre Dame, which, as I said, is the offensive line. Can Notre Dame compete for a championship with the starting offensive line that we project right now? Potentially. But it is an unknown. How good is Emil Wagner going to be? I don't know. Can Tosh Baker handle playing left tackle and be part of a championship unit? I don't know. Can either of the veterans at left guard play well enough to overcome the up and down issues they had last year? I don't know. Are Billy Schrouth and Ashton Craig going to be stars up the middle like we all hope they're going to be? I don't know. There's literally not a single offensive line position that I look at right now and say definitively, no doubt, no brainer, that's going to be a strength. I'm comfortable saying I think center and right guard are going to be really good. I think left guard is going to be better than it was last year. Unfortunately, I'm concerned that Joe Rudolph is going to start Pat Coogan unless he sucks in camp. For whatever reason, he just loves the guy. And that's my fear. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my fear. Then you look at the tackles and you say, there's some potential there, but Emil's never taken a meaningful snap in his career. And Tosh, when he did start a couple games earlier in his career at left tackle, wasn't very good. Now, that was all the way back in 2021. And I'm quite confident that Tosh Baker's a better player today than he was in 2021. But better than he was in 2021 doesn't mean championship caliber left tackle. That's an unknown. And then you start looking at the depth behind it that's actually more talented. And in a lot of spots, I mean, your most talented offensive lineman is a true freshman named Gerby Lambert. You've got guards. I mean, Sullivan Absher has more talent than Pat Coogan or Rocco Spindler. He's just far less experienced. There's some talented players behind the starters, but they're very young. And the one position you do not want to be young is offensive line. So the depth of the offensive line is a concern now. The tackle position is a much bigger concern for me now. And the experience has always been an issue. It's always been a concern. Now, are these automatic stumbling blocks? Is it me saying, like, that's the reason they're not going to win? No, because there is enough talent to say I think they can be good enough. They can be like 2018 Clemson, which was just a solid offensive line. Everybody did their job. Everybody played together. And they had a couple interior guys that were, day 2, day 3 NFL draft picks. That's it. No first rounders. Their left tackle in 2018 was actually, matter of fact, their starting left tackle on both their title teams was a kid who was a undrafted free agent coming out of the NFL draft, coming out of college, in Mitch Hyatt. Started as a true freshman, I believe, at Clemson in 2016. I mean, you guys know I like to be right about stuff. I believe Mitch Hyatt was Mitch Hyatt was a 2015 guy. So he was a true freshman, and for them in 15, started on the team that went and played for the championship game. He was a true sophomore in 2016, and then was a senior in 2018. And 4-year starter, played in 3 title games at left tackle, undrafted free agent coming out of high school. Not because of injury. He just wasn't that great of a player. But that Clemson line under coach, I think it was Robbie Caldwell, I think was their offensive line coach. They just played great together. They were a really good unit together. And that was the key. And if they can just be that, because of what I talked about before, with the talent you have on offense, I believe this team has a chance to be a really dynamic group of skill players. All you really need the offensive line to do is just do their jobs. They don't have to be dominant like the 2017 line or the 2020 line or the 2012 line at times. Just 15 line. Just do your job. Just play well. Just do your job. Play together. Don't give up bad misses here, bad sacks there, whiffs there. Just be solid. And if you're solid, there's enough talent everywhere else that you can still be really good. Now, if they play beyond solid, that only raised the bar. But if I'm looking at it right now, there's no single position group by itself that I look at and say, that's a concern with the way that it's structured today. There's some positions. Somebody in the chat, I'm not sure who it was, said that they're worried about the depth at safety. Agree. If you lose one of your veterans, I'm a little concerned about that because now you're forced to put a Don Schuler and Luke Talich in the game. And I think those are good football players. But I love those two guys in the role that they're in right now, rotation guys and all that. But if you thrust them into now they have to be the guy, are you going to be as good there? It's a big question mark. What if you lose? What if Xavier Watts is one of the guys you lose? It's a big drop off. But that's a if situation. If this happens, if this bad thing happens, if this bad thing happens, I'm concerned about that. This is the only position on the entire team that I look and say right now, the way it is right now could potentially be a stumbling block. That's it. No other position to me fits that bill except this one, which is why this is a huge year for Joe Rudolph. Huge year. He's going to have to coach his butt off and be willing to maybe take some chances that he wouldn't in past years, because if you're young overall, then maybe it's better to say, look, let's take a chance on the talent as opposed to the more consistent guy, because we're going to have some of those mistakes anyway. We need to get our best butt kickers on the field, and that's something he's going to have to strongly consider when he's talking about putting this line together. That's the one big concern that I have for this Notre Dame football team from a positional standpoint. Next up on it for me is big game pass rush. You could even define it even more narrow as big moment pass rush. There have been times the last 2 years the pass rush was great, and the pass rush was especially great in big moments. The way that Notre Dame's pass rush completely engulfed Caleb Williams last year and made him look not just human, but bad, like really, really bad, was huge. And they did it in big moments. There were some times early and at times against Ohio State where Kyle McCord had misses of guys that were maybe slightly open, but he couldn't get it there because Notre Dame got pressure on him. But on the final drive of the game, when they needed big stops, needed big plays, the D-line and the pass rush more so could not get it done. Clemson, pass rush could not get it done when it needed it most. Just couldn't. Ohio State, fourth quarter, 2022, pass rush just couldn't make stops when they needed to. Caleb Williams in 2022 could not get him down with your pass rush in that big moment. There have been some times where the pass rush in the biggest moments in the biggest games has not been good enough. That's got to change this year. If it doesn't, it could be a problem. Now, will it be a problem in regard to the 12 regular season games? That I don't know. They could potentially be good enough to win all their regular season games, but if the standard and the expectation is make a deep run, the minute you get into the postseason, it becomes an issue. For example, yesterday we did our playoff predictions, and my 6 versus 11 matchup was Notre Dame as a 6 seed, 11 seed was Ole Miss. If you can't get a pass rush on Jackson Dart, Ole Miss can hurt you. I don't care how good your secondary is. They've got very talented weapons at receiver. I made the comment that I think Notre Dame is one of the few teams that can run with that team. That is true. But I don't care how good your secondary is. If you have to cover for too long, guys are going to get open. You have to get to the quarterback, and especially Jackson Dart, and he gets comfortable, and he gets settled in the pocket, and he can throw with space. He's a very talented quarterback. Like a lot of quarterbacks, if you can consistently pressure him, he's not as good. He becomes far less accurate. His decision-making struggles, and he can get in some tough spots. That's true for a lot of quarterbacks, but he can hurt you more than most quarterbacks if you don't get pressure, not just as a thrower, but also as a guy that can scramble a little bit. So that's a game where your pass rush is going to have to be really good, really good. Round 2, I had him playing Clemson. That's another game where your pass rush last year was not great. Needs to be better, especially in big moments. I had him in the semifinals playing Oregon. You're not beating Oregon if Dylan Gabriel is sitting back in the pocket, comfortable, going through his progressions. It's not. You may, but you're going to have to win like 41-38. You're not stopping that offense if that's the case. And then, of course, the same thing is true against Georgia in the title game. That's what Bama did to Georgia last year. Just beat them up front and just didn't let – I don't think they had a lot of sacks, but they just never let Carson Beck get comfortable in the pocket. And that's the key. That's what Michigan did to Michael Penix. They didn't sack him a ton, but he was never comfortable. And then there was times they didn't put pressure on him that he threw anticipating pressure because they'd hit him so much during the game. You have to be good getting pressure in the big moments. And that doesn't have to be just the D-line. I don't care if it's a nickel fire, corner fire on 3rd and 10, linebacker blitz. I don't care who brings the pressure. That's why I didn't say D-line has to play well in big games. The pass rush in big games has to be there. And that's an area that I would argue that you look back at the last 2 years, that's been the most consistent flaw in the biggest games is the pass rush has not been what it needs to be in some of the big moments and against some of the better teams. And that's something that could potentially be a stumbling block to Notre Dame in a couple games this year. Florida State, do you really want to let DJ Uiagalelei sit in the pocket and not be pressured? Last time he was on your field and you couldn't get to him early in the game, he threw for 400 yards. Now, you won that game because in the second overtime, you got 2 huge sacks on him and then another pressure. That's great. But maybe if you'd got some of those pressures in regulation, you wouldn't have needed double overtime to beat him. And so that's obviously something that you're going to have to look at and say that's going to have to be better. In regular season as well, do you really want Connor Wegman to sit back and not feel pressured in clutch moments? Heck no, you don't. And same thing with whoever's a quarterback for USC. You're going to have to be better there. You're going to have to be better there, in my opinion, and be more of a team that can get pressures when it matters most. It's a huge, huge part of the season, and it's a potential stumbling block to Notre Dame's ultimate success. Point number 4, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one because it doesn't need a lot of time because of what it says. It's the unknowns. There's always unknowns that just pop up. What are those unknowns, and are they manageable? Every year something happens to your football team that you can't anticipate. And part of being a great team is that you build your squad into a place where when those things happen, you're prepared. I've said in the past that the best coaching job Brian Kelly ever did was 2020 because he did such a masterful job of working that team through so many things that there's just, how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare for your spring practice being cut short after one practice because of a global pandemic? How do you handle situations where, kids test positive for a virus? And I'm not trying to get into whether they should or shouldn't have been. That's not the point. Those were the rules. I'm just arguing what the rules were. And he's gone for 2 weeks. Notre Dame has to cancel games because the opponent has an outbreak of COVID. Notre Dame had to cancel games because they had an outbreak. So if you guys remember in that 2020 season, Notre Dame starts off, they play Duke in the opener. They play South Florida on September 19th. They didn't play another game until October 10th against Florida State because they had their own outbreak that they had. I think they had to move the Wake Forest game back, and then that ended up getting canceled anyway. And it just, there's so many unknowns that popped up. You lose your starting center, then you lose your backup center, and you have to overcome that. There were so many things that creeped up. Tariq Bracy sort of having a mental kind of shutdown in the middle of the season. How do you anticipate that happening? The best teams are teams that can take those unknowns. An opponent's way better than you think that they are. Things that happen you get like last year, 4 games in a row at night. You couldn't have known that before the season. You could have maybe anticipated it, but you don't know that because 2 of those games you didn't control the kickoff time. A coach getting sick before a game. Mike Norvell, when Notre Dame played Florida State in 2020, wasn't on the sideline because he was homesick. There just were all these things where in different years you have these unknowns, injuries, breakouts from other teams, scheduling issues. There's just all issues that come up in your locker room that you can't anticipate. One of your star players is having an issue at home that you've got to try to help work him through and help manage him through. And if you just ignore it, say, hey, man, focus on football, you don't actually help him through it, that could hurt your team. There's a locker room issue that you need to be prepared for and handle from a leadership standpoint within your team and also from a coaching standpoint. Those things creep up on every single football team. The teams that compete for champions are the ones that can work through that stuff and handle that stuff to the best. And that's something that this football team is going to have to be prepared for. That comes down to leadership. We don't know what kind of leadership this team has. It's still being established right now. That's part of one of the main priorities of camp is to really solidify the culture of your football team. You've been working on it for months. It really takes hold or doesn't now. And that's what I mean when I talk about unknowns. And then the fifth part also ties into this, and it's mentality. What is your mentality as a football team? Do you have that dog mentality where you say, hey, look, I don't really care what you do, what you bring. We're better than you. We've worked harder than you. We're smarter than you. We're going to outfight you. We're going to out-hit you. We're going to out-execute you. We just have that supreme confidence, and then we go about our business every day like champs. What does that mean? Does that mean like strutting into the room like Conor McGregor or that gif with Vince McMahon from back in the day? No, it's not a false enthusiasm. It's a real confidence. I think back to 2017 when Notre Dame lost to Georgia. And I remember watching the interview with Drew Tranquill afterwards, because honestly, it kind of felt like a Mr. T moment from Rocky III. You guys remember that? And Drew Tranquill basically said after that loss to Georgia that he felt sorry for their upcoming opponents because they were gonna catch it. Basically, I can remember he said pain or whatever he said, but he looked at it and was like, I feel bad for them. Well, it's fine to say. It's a great quote, but they backed it up. They won their next game by 29 and ran for over 500 yards. Their next game they won by 20 on the road against a 10-win Michigan State team. They weren't 10 wins at the time. They became one. Beat them by 20. You beat your next opponent by 35. Your next opponent by 23 without your starting quarterback. Your next opponent was a number 12 team in the country. You beat them by 35, ran for 377 yards. Your next opponent you beat by a ranked opponent you beat by 21. Your next opponent you beat by 11, and it wasn't that close. Like, they went on that run because of the mentality of the leadership of that team. They had that mentality. Now, that season also faltered for the same exact reasons because there were other parts of the team that didn't have that mentality. Head coach, some other positions. So when you face that Miami moment and the bus is being rocked before the game and they're throwing rocks at your bus and all that kind of stuff, which players have said happened, they didn't have the mindset to say, this is going to galvanize us, right? Like 1987, Miami ran through the Notre Dame huddle and they didn't do anything about it. They kind of punked and Miami stomped them. 1988, they said, nope, not doing it now. Now, I'm not saying it's good to have a brawl, but they set the tone, say, look, this is our house. Like, you don't come here. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many games in a row you've won. I don't care if you're the defending champs. This is our house. This is Notre Dame Stadium. This is where we play. This is our place. Your disrespect is on our field. We're going to go out there and make you pay for that for the next 60 minutes. Like that's a championship mentality. The next year, Lou Holtz basically bashes him into, like, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do this. And they play. And Lou Samoji explains to me, he's like, he was so adamant about not playing, not falling into he got so much crap for the fight against Miami that he sort of kind of tamped it down, and they didn't come out with that same fire the next year. And Miami whoops them in the second half to give up the third and 40 something. And then Miami pulls away from it. Like, that mentality of where your football team is so important. If you truly believe that we're better than Georgia, you may not be, but if you believe it and you prepare like it and you're a good enough football team, you can give yourself a chance to win those football games. But if you go into a game, and I pointed this out from my own career, first year as a coach, we're a great football team. We're 11-1. We won our first two playoff games. We won our first playoff game. We flew down to Texas, beat Hardin Simmons on the road. They had a receiver on their team that played in the NFL, Kirk Rogers. Great team. Beat them in overtime. Round 2, we go on the road again. We play the number 2 seed in our bracket. We beat them 41-0. We were great. Got Mount Union coming up. And I've said this before. We thought we could beat Mount Union. They knew they were going to beat us. And as soon as things kind of started going a certain way, you could tell the difference between the team that thought they could win and the team that knew they were going to win. And we ended up losing by 28 points. And I looked at the end of the game. I was like, I don't know what we say to our kids. They played hard. They did it. That team was just better than us, and we didn't know how to handle that one, right? That's very true. That's a big part of football. You got to know you're good and then know what it takes to be the best version of yourself, right? And that's what the great teams have, is that mentality. Starts at the top with the head coach and the coaches, goes down to your leadership and your veterans, and has to bleed through your whole football team. You have to be pointed in the right direction. Football has to be more important to you than partying on the weekends. If that's what you guys decide to do, if doing certain things and activities is more important to you than being as mentally prepared as you can be for this big game coming up, then you know what? You are not a champion, and your team won't be. What kind of leadership do you have? Is it just a couple guys that are doing that? Is it a big chunk of guys that are doing that? Those things all factor into what kind of football team you're going to be. And for a team like Notre Dame, who maybe doesn't have quite as big of a margin for error as Georgia and maybe some of those other teams, these last two things, the unknowns, the mentality of your football team, your leadership, your character, your culture, those things could tell the difference between we're almost as good enough to play with you and we beat you. And that's where I look at this football team, is that is going to be something that either makes this team or breaks this team. If they thrive in this area, they will reach their potential. If they don't, they will not reach their potential. And that is a big reason why some of those great Notre Dame teams that we've seen in recent years, or not great Notre Dame teams, talented Notre Dame teams, underachieved because they didn't have enough of this, whether it was at the coaching level or the player level, wherever it was missing. And that's why when things really hit the fan, they could not see it to the end and finish the way that they needed to finish. Yeah, it went great after Georgia for a couple months, and Miami happened and your team completely fell apart. And that's what we've got to learn about this football team and see what they can be. Before we get out of here, I do have a few super chats, 3 actually. Number 1, Anthony Solomon, thanks for flying solo today, Bryan. You are welcome. Lucky Ducks 512, thank you for your super chat as well. Dates for Peacock's Here Come the Irish docuseries, August 29th, episodes 1 and 2. December 5th, episodes 3 and 4. December 19th, episodes 5 and 6. January 16th, episode 7 just announced. Yeah, I saw the tweet with the preview, but I haven't seen the preview yet. I haven't had a chance to watch that yet. So thank you for putting it out there. And then super chat from AST12321, thank you very much. If your only choice in next 10 years was 2 Michigan-style titles that nobody outside the Indy fandom respects or regularly making the top 4 but not winning a natty, how do you go? Well, if it's Michigan style in that they won because they cheated, I don't want to win that way. I don't want to win that way. If it's they don't respect Notre Dame's title because Notre Dame got an easy draw, or the bracket worked out to where they were never tested and they only had to really win one tough play, I don't care about that. That's not their fault. That's out of their control. The best team lost their starting quarterback before the game. Whatever. That's your problem. You should have had a better number 2 quarterback. I don't care that nobody respects the championship. Doesn't matter to me at all. But if it's a championship you won through sacrificing your character and sacrificing any kind of moral foundation to sacrificing your respect for the game, I don't want to win that way. So it just depends on what you mean by nobody. Look, here's the reality. Most likely no one outside of Notre Dame fandom is going to respect Notre Dame winning a title anyway. Let's be real about that, so especially from a fan standpoint. And like I saw one of the dumbest things ever today. There was a tweet about how it's ridiculous. People say Notre Dame's always overrated. It's just nonsense. And there's been a couple years they were overrated, and a lot of other years where they were either right at what they were ranked preseason or they were better than they were ranked preseason. And they say, well, and you point that out to these people, and they'll say, well, it doesn't matter because they shouldn't have been ranked that high at the end anyway. Like, okay, so they went 10-3, beat 4 ranked teams, but they still shouldn't have been ranked that high because you don't like Notre Dame. Okay, that's just silly. And those people are never going to change their minds, ever going to change their minds. That I don't worry about them. So if it's something like that, I don't care. I don't care if they don't respect it, as long as we did it the right way. But I don't ever want to win by cheating, knowingly cheating. And what I mean by cheating, I mean doing things that give you an unfair advantage that blatantly go against the rules of the game. So I don't respect people who use steroids. I don't respect people who steal signals the way that Michigan did it. Right? Like there's just some things you don't play a player that is ineligible or something along those lines. If you don't purposely make the wires go out on the headsets of your opposing team to gain it, that's cheating, right? I don't want to win that way. If I'm not good enough to beat you when we stand toe to toe, mano a mano, then I don't deserve to win, right? I don't respect winning because the other guy, I cheated the other guy. I don't want to, I don't want to, like, it's okay. I'll put so I'm the best website in Notre Dame football because I hired a hacker and paid him $1 million to make all the other websites go down. Guess what? I have the best website, numero uno, yay, Irish Breakdown. Well, I didn't really do anything except cheat, right? I want to be the best because the work we put in, the content that we produce, the all the different things go into because we earned it. And if you don't truly earn it, if you're just not good enough and you've got to go do these things or these things to gain an unfair advantage to cheat the game, then I don't respect that. I don't want to win that way. That's just my opinion. Some people don't care. If you're not cheating, you're not trying. Screw that. Like I don't respect that. I wouldn't enjoy winning that way. I wouldn't. And that's a bummer. I wouldn't want to win that way. So my answer would be I'd rather make the top 4, not win a natty. If I'm not good enough to win a natty over the next 10 years, then I'm not good enough to win a natty. If I have to cheat to win one, then I wasn't good enough anyway because I had to cheat to win it, and it wouldn't mean anything to me. So that's kind of how I look at it. So thank you for that super chat. I appreciate you very much. And it's a fair question. I'd be curious what people in the board feel about that one. So, yeah, very, very, very curious about that one. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review on all your favorite platforms. We would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And, of course, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you are someone who still thinks our website, some people say, well, I went to this SI and you weren't there anymore. And irishbreakdown.com. That's the easy way. Just type into your chat, irishbreakdown.com. That's going to take you to our free site. Boards.irishbreakdown.com is going to take you to our premium message board. You don't have to worry about, are you filled with SI or you filled with Athlon? None of that matters in regard to the website. It's irishbreakdown.com. That'll take you to our website. And so make sure that you have that bookmarked, irishbreakdown.com, because wherever we are, you will always find Irish Breakdown at irishbreakdown.com. Definitely check that out. Have a great day, everybody. IB Nation Sports Talk will be back at 5 o'clock tonight. I'll be back tomorrow. We're going to have a practice report at 1 o'clock. We'll do our buy-sell hold tomorrow. You guys are going to get a chance to meet Trevor Trowbridge, who is one of the new writers that we had. Got a chance to, me and Vince were talking with him yesterday, got his mic all set up. He's ready to rock and roll. Can't wait till you guys get a chance to meet Trevor and we get a chance to talk ball with him. I'm going to throw him kind of into the deep end with a buy-sell hold tomorrow. It's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to it. I will see you all again very soon. Thank you all so much for joining me on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.